The Chrollo vs Hisoka fight in the Hunter x Hunter manga has been one of my favorite fights in recent history, and this is primarily due to the fact that it's such a complex fight. I knew from the very beginning that I'd have to go back and reread and reanalyze the fight over and over again to really get a grasp of what's going on, especially with all those techniques that Chrollo was using during the fight. So I did exactly that. In this video, I'm going to be going over bit by bit, piece by piece, what exactly happened in the fight, at least what I think happened. And keep in mind that this is going to be primarily all from Chrollo Lucifer's standpoint, since he's the one using all these crazy abilities. Now, I highly recommend that you guys watch part 1, where I talk about what I believe and why a lot of people believe that this is not a 1v1 fight. In fact, Chrollo had the help of these spiders during the fight with him, and it makes things really interesting and makes the fight actually make some sense. So please watch that video before you watch this one, and without further ado, let's go ahead and get to the start of the fight. The beginning of the fight is pretty straightforward. Togashi takes the first 2 chapters to really set up all of the new abilities that Chrollo has gained specifically to take on Hisoka, as well as explain to the viewers and even to Hisoka himself what these powers do and how they are used. The most interesting development in my opinion is the fact that Chrollo has acquired the double face bookmark, and what this allows him to do is to go ahead and set the bookmark, affix it to the page of an ability, and as long as it's there, even if the book is closed, he can use the ability. Now the main reason this is important is because it allows him to use abilities with 2 hands. And so I think one of the main things that people overlooked is the interaction between the bookmark and these new double-handed abilities. What I mean is that to use the skill Hunter, to use the book, he has to have it in his right hand open. So that means that his left hand is available. But if he's using one of these double-handed abilities properly, which means that he's using it in both hands, then he must have the bookmark on the page and he has to have the book closed. That means that he can only be using that ability and he cannot be using a second ability at the same time. Now, he can of course use his left hand while having the book open, as long as he has the bookmark set to that page. For instance, he could have the sun and moon either open or a bookmark to it, and that means that he would be able to use the left hand, which is free, to put in the sun sign onto anything pretty much, to affix the sun sigil. But if he wants to set the moon, or the minus sign I believe, then what that means is that he has to have the book closed, and thus he's only using one ability, which is whichever page is bookmarked. Same thing goes with convert hands. If he wants to use convert hands while having the book open, he can. This just means that he would be able to use his left hand to turn into a clone of another person that he touches. But if he wanted to use the right hand to turn someone into a clone of Chrollo, he would have to have the book closed and thus not have any other abilities able to be used at that time. And this is something that's going to be brought up later in the fight, so keep that in mind. And when it comes to Gallery Fake, I'm pretty sure you just need both hands to use the ability in the first place, so that one, out of the question. If you're using Gallery Fake, you can't be using any other abilities at the same time. The other thing to keep in mind about the introduction is that we get the revelation that the Sun and Moon Elder who had the ability previously apparently had passed away. But his ability resided in the book still, and his Sun and Moon marks remain affixed even if he dispels the ability, which is something else that's going to be pretty important during the fight. Keep that in mind. And with that said, let's go ahead and get into the actual fight. So as the fight begins, they both rush to the stands, and what I believe happens here is that, first off, Chrollo dispels Gallery Fake and actually ends up returning it to Cortopi so that he can start creating copies throughout the entire arena. Next, he sets the bookmark to Order Stamp and opens the book to Black Voice. He ends up using both of the antennas on random civilians there and issues them the command to attack Hisoka. Now, while he's controlling those two and while they are attacking Hisoka, he switches clothing, which is really interesting, and he starts to use Order Stamp to stamp the clones that Cortopi had been making. Now, once Hisoka takes out both of the clones, Chrollo dispels Black Voice and returns the ability to Shalnark for later use. I want to point out once again that Hisoka notices the antenna has disappeared randomly, and he hints that it could have been something like a fishing line to pull the antenna back. Chrollo orders the newly stamped puppets to break Hisoka, and at this point it is possible that he opens the book to Sun and Moon and start affixing the sun symbol onto some of these clones, although that would be up to speculation. Hisoka does a good job of dodging the clones, using a bungee gum that he had previously attached to the ceiling to escape. But it is at this point that Chrollo decides to join in alongside his cloned stamped members and actually manages to land some good hits on Hisoka. But Hisoka gets the last laugh at this point because he manages to land 2 hits on Chrollo, first with using the bungee gum on a severed head of a clone to attack, and then on the other side he used contract of his bungee gum to land another hit. And so this is a pretty good moment for Hisoka. As Hisoka and the stamped clones continue their back and forth skirmish, Chrollo decides to back off into the stands and continues to stamp and seal the clones which Chrollo continues to be making. Remember how earlier I said that if Chrollo used Gallery Fake, he wouldn't be able to use any other abilities at the same time? Well, Hisoka caught wind of this and he decided to take a clone and wait until the ordered stamp had disappeared. As long as the ordered stamp remains on the clone, Chrollo is unable to make any more copies using Gallery Fake. And so he actually goes ahead and dispels ordered stamp anyways because he'll know that it'll trick Hisoka, because remember, the real person using Gallery Fake at the moment is Chrollo. Now that he has dispelled ordered stamp, this is the one and only time in the entire fight in which Chrollo has his right hand free to go ahead and use Sun and Moon and convert hands. So the first thing he does is affix both the Sun and Moon signs onto as many clones as possible. Next, he goes ahead and bookmarks the convert hands and uses convert hands using his right hand to give an audience member Chrollo's appearance. Keeping that bookmark on convert hands, he opens the book to the ordered stamp page and starts stamping those Sun and Moon clones, giving them the order to move to the second floor and detonate as soon as they make contact with Hisoka. Then Shalnark, having regained his abilities mid-fight, takes control of the Chrollo puppet, but he's using a different phone and a different set of needles than the ones which Chrollo was using before. Once Hisoka arrives at the stand, he takes on the Chrollo clone, and he ends up defeating it pretty easily. Now there's a couple of things that I want to point out here, so I'm going to take a small break to talk about them. First, you'll notice that the needle that was being used was different than the previous needle, like I mentioned before. You see it both on the back of the clone's neck as well as when Hisoka is holding on to it. Now some people originally thought that this was Illumi's needle, but if you go back and look at scenes with Mach, you'll notice that on her left wrist she also carries around some needles which look very similar. Now if you want a better look at this, go back to the fight with Castro versus Hisoka. Now after the fight, Hisoka ends up getting his arms reattached thanks to Machi, and there you'll see those needles. You'll see them right there as Machi's using them. So this is another indicator that Machi indeed took part in this fight as well. The other thing I want to mention is the clone's clothing. If you'll notice, once the Chrollo clone is defeated, his clothing go back to the original clothing of the person. Now this is important because we see Chrollo change clothes twice during the fight. And so originally I thought that this was due to him swapping bodies or becoming a clone of a different person. But I'm not sure anymore, and I think that he just changed his clothing mid-fight to blend in. But it could be possible that for some reason, when he used Convert Hands to take the image of another person, he maintained those clothes somehow. But that's up in the air, and they're not really that important, so I just wanted to mention that though. Okay, back to the fight. Now, the whole time that Hisoka is fighting that Convert Hands created clone, Chrollo is creating some more stamped puppets and orders them to move around after a little bit to create a ruckus. That distraction eventually allows Chrollo to take control of the mic from the announcer and order every single clone in the audience to break Hisoka. Chrollo decides to retreat back into the stands while Hisoka is getting ambushed by the clones and ends up making a call to who more than likely is Shalnark. Now Shalnark, remember, has a second needle available, so he uses it on one of the clones, or just someone with one of these signs, and ends up controlling him so that he can detonate the bomb, which eventually takes out Hisoka's hand. So at this point it's pretty much checkmate. Hisoka will try to go as high as possible to avoid the horde of clones, but Chrollo is one step ahead and not only ordered those previous set of clones to move up to the second floor, which, you remember, as they're moving to the second floor, they probably didn't hear the break announcement since they're outside of the stands. And then on top of that, he ended up ordering someone to cut down the bungee gum. Now this could have been any of those characters, probably Machi in my opinion. We don't really know how it was cut down, but I expected that it could be Machi. And at this point, like I said, it was checkmate. There's nothing really Hisoka could have done to escape this other than what he ended up doing. So overall, Hisoka ended up using his knowledge of residual nen to cover his heart and lungs with his bungee gum, and ended up covering himself with a ton of clones to survive the explosion. This way, after death, his bungee gum would automatically contract due to knowing that his will is strong enough. That would allow him to come back to life. Then using a little bit of texture surprise and a little bit of bungee gum, managed to sort of create prosthetic limbs for the moment and cover up a couple of his wounds. So hopefully you guys enjoyed my analysis of the Chrollo versus Hisoka fight. In my opinion, it's a very interesting one because knowing what we know now, we got to see it from both Chrollo's perspective and we got to see it from Hisoka's perspective, which was a skewed perspective. He assumed some things that weren't necessarily true, and so he carried out those throughout the entire fight, and it was cool to see how Togashi did that. But at the end of the day, we ended up knowing what actually happened. So if you guys enjoyed this Hunter x Hunter video, make sure to subscribe for more because I have a lot of them planned, including discussions about the Dark Continent, discussions about the bookmarks restrictions, and discussion about a lot of other things in the Hunter x Hunter universe. So with that said, guys, hopefully you enjoyed the video, and until next time, thanks for watching.